Welcome to The World Awaits.
Travel tales to inspire your wanderlust.
I'm Kirsty Bedford, journalist, editor and travel writer.
And I'm Belinda Jackson, author, travel journalist and columnist, and we're your weekly co-hosts.
Welcome back to The World Awaits. How are you all?
Hi, everyone.
So there have been some major changes in the last few weeks within the airline industry, and we thought we'd do a little wrap-up of the good and the bad. So since I'm a half-glass full kind of girl, let's start with the good. So if you're in Queensland or close enough to drive there, there are a few new international routes out of Brisbane. So first up, Nauru Airlines just launched direct flights to Palau. Gosh, this island looks amazing. It's in the Northwest Pacific, and it's launched a world-first initiative called Allow Palau that allows rewards those who respect the environment. So basically you get points that give you exclusive cultural experiences by calculating your footprint. So you do things, obviously, that are treading lightly, and then you gain points, and that gives you access to exclusive, authentic, sort of genuine local experiences. Such a cool initiative. And Palau's also really well known for its stunning waters, snorkeling, and it's a bit of a super yacht playground. So who wouldn't want to go there?
Also, Qantas is going to start flying to Manila in the Philippines in October, which is the first time the airline has flown between the two cities for more than a decade. And Qantas is also going to increase its flights to Singapore by about 10%. So that's 2,500 more seats per week, which is great because if Singapore is a feeder to the rest of the globe for Australians. And then flying from Sydney to Bengaluru will also increase from 5 per week to daily to cater for a strong demand, particularly over the peak holiday season between mid-December 24 and late March 25, adding more than 12,000 seats between the two cities over the 4 months.
Gosh, that's a lot. And in good news for WA, in April, South Australian Airways began flights between Johannesburg and Perth. The non-stop flight operates 3 times a week. So good news for all of those South Africans that live in Perth. There's a lot of big community of South Africans living in WA. And also it's an alternative itinerary, obviously, for if you're going to South America, with flights also available to Sao Paulo, Brazil, from either Joburg or Cape Town with South African Airways.
Most in travel will have heard of the news of the Bonza and Vanuatu airline collapses, which is said to be due to myriad reasons. The Financial Review reported that Vanuatu's collapse was due to that country's indebtedness to Chinese Belt and Road Initiative infrastructure projects. But it means that many Australians, amongst others, were left out of pocket and stranded. And the scale of the Bonza collapse, Bonza is that the purple low-cost airline, has just been revealed in court with more, almost 60,000 customers affected. And its collapse after 18 months of operation is a huge loss for regional Australia. Not for lack of demand, because apparently most of its flights were full, but it seems that its backers had deep financial problems.
And from the end of July, Qantas is suspending flights to Shanghai due to low demand. So Qantas actually resumed its Sydney-Shanghai service in October last year after it was paused during COVID. But the CEO, Cam Wallace, said that since COVID, the demand for travel between Australia and China hasn't recovered as strongly as it expected. And in some months, the flights were actually only half full. So it's now suspending that route and boosting flying to other popular destinations.
Ending up on a positive note here, if you listened to our podcast a few weeks ago, you might have heard us chatting about how the cost of airfares are falling. And if you didn't, you can jump back to episode 40 to take a listen. Flight Centre says the good news for travellers is that it is likely the downward trend will continue through 2024 as competition and capacity continue to increase. And it says that airfare prices are going to ease, with long-haul prices being impacted the most, and it anticipates continued customer interest in such destinations as the UK, Europe, the USA and Canada.
You're listening to The World Awaits. We'd love it if you could leave us a rating and review on your favourite podcast platform.
My guest today is Tim Cope, an adventurer, an author and a filmmaker. He has undertaken several adventures of epic proportions, such as riding a bicycle for 10,000 kilometres across Russia, rowing a wooden boat up a Siberian river to the Arctic Ocean, and he also spent 3.5 years crossing the breadth of Genghis Khan's empire from Mongolia to Hungary on horseback with his companion, the dog Tigon. Tim, welcome to The World Awaits. It's so great to have you here.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, look, it's not every day that you get a bona fide adventurer to talk to you. You've undertaken some incredible experiences which have earned you, amongst other things, awards such as Adventurer of the Year from Australian Geographic Society, and you have been National Geographic's Adventurer of the Year. Did you set out to have a business card that lists adventurer as your job description? Was it a conscious decision?
My love for adventure and nature, I think, were kind of seeded when I was very young. Growing up in Gippsland, I had a father into the outdoors, and I vividly remember that feeling of being out in a place, be it a weekend, be it a school holiday, when, I couldn't have expressed it the way I can now, but it's that feeling of even a day or two of being able to write the script of your own life, to have that incredible freedom. But at the same time, knowing that you're at the mercy, in a sense, of destiny, of what lies around the corner. And I think that I have, in life generally, always been drawn to walking that tightrope between knowing when to take control and try to control the narrative of your life, and knowing when to let go and allow the unexpected to take you places that you haven't imagined, where you can learn things new. So that was certainly there from a very young age. I did happen to have a year off between school and study, and that's what really set alight my passion for exploring other places and other cultures, and at the same time my passion for writing. So it felt as if my writing and travel were kind of like a hand in glove fit. But if you had told me when I was 18 that I'd be, riding a horse across Eurasia within 5 or 6 years, I simply wouldn't have believed it.
I mean, that was my question. I really wanted to ask you when we first started talking about an interview. You were a member of the Long Riders Guild, which is an international association dedicated to very, very, very long horse rides. But what's incredible, when I was reading your book On the Trail of Genghis Khan, what's incredible in that you told us in the book was that when you first decided to ride 10,000 kilometres from Mongolia to Hungary, you could not actually ride a horse. So what inspired you to undertake this epic adventure?
Yeah, I do remember walking down the road at where I grew up in Gippsland with my mum, and I'd just gotten back from this great big cycling journey across Russia. In fact, I'd been in Finland for a year before that. I hadn't been home for 2.5 years, and I mentioned to her that I'd like to ride horses like the Mongols did, from Mongolia all the way to Budapest and beyond in Hungary. And my poor mum, of course, she stopped aghast, didn't say anything, but it was written all over her face. One of many problems was, of course, I couldn't ride a horse. In fact, I was terrified of them. When I was 7, my dad had brought a horse home. I'd been bucked off fairly promptly, broken my arm and never been back on. But what really inspired me was when I was 21 years old, I did happen to be in Mongolia on a bicycle. A friend and I had decided to fulfill our kind of shared dream of riding bicycles across Russia and Siberia, and our exit route was out via Beijing. When I entered Mongolia, I was just completely taken aback. We'd be pushing our bikes through the Gobi Desert or wherever, and these little specks would appear over the horizon, these horsemen and horsewomen, and rapidly come galloping our way, sometimes singing. They'd stop in front of us. They would, pull back their cloaks. Deep in their pockets, they'd have a little bit of dried curd, known as udal, or maybe a flask of fermented horse milk, and we'd have this improvised conversation, a little bit of a nibble, a drink, and then off they'd gallop in whichever direction they pleased, leaving us feeling like wimpy tourists kind of pushing our bikes along these miserable wheel tracks that had a predetermined path. I'd never looked at horses in that way. Among many other things, horses have developed and evolved co-inhabiting the same place as humans for untold millennia. They've evolved together, and about 6,000 years ago, roughly, humans began to ride them and domesticate horses on the Great Eurasian Steppe. And that gave these people a quantum leap forward in the way they lived their lives. Tomorrow could become today. They could ride, if they really pushed hard, you can ride 200 kilometres in a day. And not that you would, but it's much further than you could walk in a day. And it changed the world forever. And of course, the horsemen and horsewomen of Eurasia were those who delivered the horse and horsemanship to the rest of the world. And so I suddenly saw the horse as this indigenous animal that had this symbiotic relationship with the original people of that land. And that, to me, was the only way to travel this landscape and truly get beneath the surface and understand it. I wanted to know what it might have been like for a young man like myself to set off from my home in say, Mongolia, ride across this vast, vast land, arriving in Europe and looking at that strange sedentary world from their prism. So from the get-go, there was absolutely no doubt in my mind that horses were the only way to break away from roads, to break away and transcend the modern era. Of course, we mentioned the issue was I'd barely ever been on one.
Couldn't ride. Slight technical difficulty. And then how did you learn how to ride? Did you learn? I understand you have a connection with northeast Victoria, with Mount Beauty, and that actually is where you started to learn how to ride. And to do long distance riding, because that's a very different animal to a pony trek for an afternoon.
Yes, absolutely. It is horses for courses after all. And I reached out to a family in the northeast, a Baird family, and they were the only people I could find that run pack trips with pack horses over the Victorian Alps. So they kindly had me on one of their trips for 5 days. I then found a wonderful family down in Margaret River of Western Australia who agreed to give me a bit of a crash course in natural horsemanship, and also a veterinarian there that was prepared to help equip me with a fantastic kit and basically unlimited service by satellite phone from there onwards when I was over in Mongolia. So the truth is, though, by the time I arrived in Mongolia, I'd only been on a horse 5 days, having done, of course, a lot of research. But ultimately, to answer your question, I learned to ride horses among nomadic people of Mongolia, of Kazakhstan. I found my feet there. Everything I learned about horses really was from them, even though some of the foundational stuff I learned in Australia certainly served me very well and very long.
And I think that's the other, that is, that relationship with the horse is definitely one part of it. But then the people that have that relationship is the other thing that underpinned your book, which was about nomadic societies. And especially when I read the book and you were getting closer when you were in southern Russia and Ukraine, and you were getting, you were changing from that very wild landscape of Mongolia into deep into Europe, then, there's such a wistfulness in a way for that type of living, that type of mindset of being part of a nomadic society. And I use the word society in that concept of of friends and having friends and connections and a place in the world too. It seems there's a wistfulness in your book, and a common theme in that book about being in the land of the nomads.
Yes, I think having grown up in Australia, in country Victoria, from when I was very young, I used to try to imagine with a sense of fascination, nostalgia and sadness in a way, what Australia would have been like prior to colonisation, prior to Indigenous culture being so changed, of course, in the landscape with it. And being in Mongolia was this opportunity to to live among a sovereign nomad nation, to learn the ways and means. Some of it was fairly difficult, like on the 5th day of the trip, it was a pretty difficult experience to wake up at 3 a.m. to find that 2 of the horses had actually been stolen. I leapt out of the tent, and 1 horse was remaining. It was still tied up. Unfortunately, this bell that I'd been given by the vet in Australia to wear as a kind of an alarm for thieves hadn't worked. They slipped the bell off, jumped on, and run away with the animals. I ended up a few hours later on this horse spotting my animals in a herd. And the kind herder came over and said, "I know they're your horses. You must have tied them up really badly. They've come to me themselves." It didn't explain where all my halters and things were gone. It didn't matter. He gave them back. We went back to his home. He introduced me to his family, and he told me this wonderful nomad saying that a person on the steppe without friends is as narrow as a finger, and a person on the steppe with friends is as wide as the steppe. And that was one of those very first big lessons for me, that I'd gone in there in a way full of hopes and dreams, but also a sense of naivety and insularity. I hadn't branched out to get to know the people. And from here on, I was going to have to make it the number one priority to engage with people and learn their ways as I travelled. So the first year and a half of the trip really was in Mongolia and Kazakhstan. In Kazakhstan, there was a sense of sadness that permeated throughout society, because in the 1920s and 30s, the industrialization campaign during Stalin's reign had essentially uprooted nomads from their way of life. They'd been forcibly settled in collectives. Roughly 2.2 million Kazakhs are believed to have died in what was essentially an artificial famine during that period of great instability and the culture kind of being crushed in many ways. However, there are still nomads in Kazakhstan, and that landscape lives and breathes the spirit of those people. But as I travelled further west from there, this is getting into 2 years into the trip, into Russia, Crimea, increasingly you're starting to encounter people like the Kalmyks, for example. The Kalmyks are a Mongolian people living in a republic of southern Russia, the last great nomad nation to migrate to Europe and back to Asia again. The remains of whom still live in this part of southern Russia, and the sense of nostalgia they had for their ancient way of life was palpable. Everyone pined for it. There was you might call it a wistfulness about that way of life that, of course, they'd lost. They'd long since been colonised by the Russian Empire, and that way of life had disappeared somewhere beyond living memory during World War II. The Kalmyks, like many nationalities in Russia, were deported to Siberia in fear of collaborating with the Nazis that were on their way into Russia. Their culture had been so eroded, but they still kept it as this kind of this sense of nostalgia that almost assumes that at some point in the future they will return to their past, or they hoped, even if it's very unlikely. And that was the case as I travelled further. Hungarians, for example, the Magyars, were also once nomads who came riding somewhere out of, I think, what is now southern Siberia or northern Kazakhstan, into the Carpathian Basin, creating the nation of Magyar in the 10th century. So it's all the way along, it was as if I was walking in the shadow of their own ancestors, and that it gave me a wonderful insight into them and opened many doors. But it also left me also with that sense of sadness at times and nostalgia for the past.
Going, back to that, as you say, back to the sovereign nation, which is Mongolia. it's really having its time in the sun at the moment as a must-visit travel destination. So I think maybe it's not. It does resonate with people more broadly than that. I mean, Lonely Planet named Mongolia the #1 destination to visit in 2024. What do you think are the main reasons to visit it? And I say that because you do actually lead tours with World Expeditions to Mongolia. Now that you created that connection with the country, and you've got a bond in it that is very strong. Why do you think people are going? Why do you think that Mongolia is having that time as the must-visit travel destination?
Well, I've been going back to Mongolia now for 24 years, and my hunger to return is the same as it was, if not more, each and every year. In fact, I just returned last week from a film shoot in Mongolia, and I mean, it's a land where a lot of the principles of our modern way of life are turned on the head. The people, by convention, invite strangers into the home, into their lives. Having a home is a birthright. There are no such thing as fences. There's no such thing as trespassing, as we would know it. Hospitality is the rule, not the exception. I've just come back from this place in spring where I rode camels through frozen sand dunes, this giant, hundreds of meters tall fan next to frozen lakes, breaking the ice to eventually water the camels, then across this vast plain, and hovering in the distance, of course, are these 4,000 meter peaks with snow and glaciers. Within the space of literally 10 days on foot and on camel, you're traversing deserts, inland seas that almost rival, perhaps not Lake Eyre with their size, but certainly enormous vast bodies of water that intersect almost unbelievably with this dry desert. And then next thing you know, you're in the mountains where you've got wolves crossing your path. You've come out of a world of camels yesterday, and now there's yaks. And you know that there's snow leopards in those peaks all around. And these people that I was traveling with, it's minus 52 degrees in that desert in the winter. It's 40 degrees of heat in the summer. And one of the things that I sat down and I learned for the first time, having been there, so was this particular type of native grain that they harvest in the desert in the summer and the autumn. And there's a very long process to thrash and grind. It's kind of a family effort to create this very special flour that they then add to their milky tea for sustenance. They make small, sweet snacks to give them sustenance. And of course, they feed it to their animals in times of need. And I mean, that's just a little window of one trip I've just done out of dozens. And it's an authentic way of living in that landscape that's unbroken. There's a continuity, there's a pride in their culture. We might hear this narrative in the West that in places like Mongolia, where there's a traditional way of living, that in the modern world, young people are drawn to the cities like moths to a flame, and when the old world brushes up against the new, the new always appears to kind of win out. But in Mongolia, I've never met a family that has uprooted and left. One of the communities I just went to, they were proud to say that the size of their nomadic community, called a sum, has actually increased, not decreased. No family has picked up and left to the city. From my point of view, the future of nomadic culture is really bright, and there are so many people who take incredible pride in that way of living, and a conscious decision to remain in the countryside. So the statistics, I think, suggest that tourism all around the world is primarily cultural tourism. You can break it down if you want to, compartmentalize it into landscape or historical sites or holiday destinations, but ultimately what people are looking for is living and breathing and learning about a new culture, and the way in which that culture has moulded and been moulded by the lands that they live in. And I think Mongolia, you couldn't find a more authentic place than Mongolia. So I imagine that is a really big reason why it's been chosen as a number one destination this year, and certainly it's why I return each and every year. It's for the people. It's you get an insight into the potential for us as humans, and a huge chunk of our human history. Of course, we've in much of the world we've become very urbanized and very removed in many ways from our land and that type of life.
Do they when you do go, and I've seen some photos of when you've been leading tours through Mongolia. I mean, is it? Are there a lot of visitors? And if you're bringing somebody into one of those, into a group of people, into a group of, have tea with the Nomads and stuff, do they want to see us? Do they want us to bring in our external ideas and thoughts and into that society? I mean, you've given me an enormous amount of hope that these societies are going to keep existing. Do they want us? Do they want us there, sitting in their gers, drinking their tea, and eating their dried curd?
Well, in nomadic culture, travellers, of course, are revered, and on migration day, when a family picks up, puts all their belongings on the camel, or it might be in a truck, wherever they might be, it's one of the most special days of the year where you pass by your neighbours, your friends, everyone comes out, shares stories, catches up on gossip. There might be a bit of courting that takes place. All your best wear, saddles, clothing, your children, animals, everything's on display. And it would be very bad luck to let a traveller pass. And the places that I take people tend to be remote, and there aren't many people who visit those places. And for a lot of those places, like one particular area, I've been running a trip for World Exhibitions. I've been returning to that area for 20 years, and I've seen families grow, children born. I've seen elders pass away in that time, and every time we go past, there is absolutely no way that you could go past them without being waved in. And to be able to sit down, to be able to talk about our lives, to be able to share stories, there's always a sense of mutual curiosity. And one of the things that has been left very deeply in my mind after my big travel, my 3.5-year journey by horse, oftentimes I was the recipient of incredible hospitality and generosity, when really without it I may not be here. And in return, they always said the most important thing is that you don't forget us. And that's because for nomads, like for most human beings, it's that genuine sense of engagement with someone, this sense that in the midst of life that's, let's face it, it's difficult, it's full of unknowns, it's full of rough seas. If there's a moment where you can sit in peace and quiet and calm and share a cup of tea, share stories and solidarity with each other, you have become a part of each other's lives. And to forget that would be the biggest insult, if you like, to these people. And of course, I've never forgotten. And every year we go back, we bring back photos from the previous year. We have stories, and the nomads that travel with me, we've been traveling for a long time now, and they love the adventure, just like any other human being, of being able to get away from the repetitious chores of daily life to go on an adventure with us, to meet new people, to catch up with old friends along the way. So it tends to be just a wonderful experience for everyone, the trekkers, the locals. I can't speak for those areas that are closer to Ulaanbaatar, that are frequented by more organised, you might call it mass tourism for want of a better word. I think that type of tourism is always very different, but that hasn't reached the type of regions that I travel to.
Then those regions are so inaccessible for most people. In your book, some of the experiences that you had, and as you've just mentioned now, plus 40 degrees in the summer, minus 52, astonishing to live through that and to survive. I don't think that without the people that you mentioned in the book, I don't think you would have been here either today having this conversation. It is a completely incredibly harsh landscape, the one that you describe in your book on the Trail of Genghis Khan. So when is the best time to visit Mongolia? When is it? I mean, summer is incredibly hot, winter is incredibly cold. Is there a beautiful time in the balance in between, in spring or early autumn that you would best visit?
Look, there is a place for every season in Mongolia, and the Nomads, of course, are the best examples of that. And all of the trips that I run are worked in very carefully with the seasons. So in the height of summer, where do the Nomads go? They travel to the places that are cooler, the mountains, the high alpine grasses, the places, in the shadow of glaciers and beautiful alpine lakes, where they can leave the heat behind and the animals are comfortable, and the insects and everything else. Once things start to cool down a little bit in mid-August in the mountains, the Nomads tend to migrate out of those mountains down towards the river valleys, where they might cut their grass for the coming winter. And at that point, the mosquitoes and other bugs have settled down. So I tend to recommend to everyone, July and August is the time to go to the higher parts of Mongolia, to the mountains. It's not the time to go to the Gobi Desert. That'd be like going to Central Australia in the middle of summer. It's not really preferable. But autumn, I love to travel to lakes and river valleys, and that's where the Nomads are, because they go down to places where the spring floods have receded and the greenery, and there's lots of green pasture along those banks, lots of really good feed. Late autumn, September, October, November is a wonderful time to explore the desert regions. You have crystal clear blue skies, there's no haze, you don't tend to get the same big sand and dust storms that you have in spring and also in summer. In the middle of winter, that's the one time that I guess that takes a special breed of traveller.
And I can't imagine what it would be like at that point. You definitely have to be a special breed to endure some of that landscape. But then people, as you say, people do. But
well, people live in that world, and it's just a matter of learning how to travel lightly and carefully with the local people, and they have all of the answers.
Yeah, absolutely. But in your non-Mongolian adventures, it's not like you're sitting still. You've been guiding on the Franklin River as well, as a river guide. What is your next adventure? Is that something that you're going to develop? Or do you have something in mind for your next expedition?
I've got too many things in mind.
Okay, tell me the one that's possible, right?
One of the missing links for me personally in the puzzle of nomadic life is winter in remote parts of Mongolia. And so one of my dreams is to return to Mongolia and spend a full winter and recording the experience of how these families cope, keeping in mind that they send their children off to boarding school come the 1st of September. Anyone over from the age of 6 upwards has gone, and the family's left to cope with this very dark and very long and cold winter. So that's one of my dreams. I'd like to trek across Australia from the Gulf of Carpentaria down to the tip of Tassie. I would love to explore more of India. One of my dreams that I may not be able to live out now, given the way the world is, but is to travel from Rajasthan to Spain on the trail of gypsy people, of the Romani people. I've got many different dreams and ideas, but yes, I've been since COVID guiding more trips in Australia, and one of the places that I've always been in love with is the Snowy River of Eastern Victoria, and organising trips there, Tasmania. I was fortunate to travel for the last 3 years on some scientific expeditions in the Simpson Desert as well. So I've been able to live out quite a few dreams of late, but with COVID having disappeared into the rear vision, I am able to focus more back on Mongolia again. I'd love to travel Kazakhstan again as well, and I know I keep going back to Mongolia, but it's a big country, and I've still got a lot of places there to explore that I haven't been.
Do you think there's another book in that one, possibly?
My aim for living in the winter in Mongolia would be to make a film and to record it, to potentially write a book. But I don't believe that any story can be pre-scripted. You're not quite sure whether you've got a book in it until the story has unfolded. So I'll keep that one. Keep that one an open book, if you like.
Right, because I mean, your notebooks were stolen. Your early notebooks were stolen in that adventure. Is that right? That you actually lost your notes when you were riding the trail of Genghis Khan?
Yes, sadly, I spent 3.5 years on the road. I've always written fairly religiously in my diaries, and I use them as a tool for a source of kind of inspiration later when I'm writing my books. And sadly, I had a bag with me here in Australia. I'd been to visit my film editor to go run through a bit of video footage, and on the way back I was in Melbourne, parked outside my sister's place. She was renting in St Kilda, and having carted these diaries all that way safely, someone broke into the car and stole the backpack, thinking it was obviously a heavy bag with some expensive goodies. And despite a big campaign to find them, they were never found. So that was a portion, of course, of all my diaries. And when I wrote that book, I knew that to prove that I could write that book was to write the first sample chapter for a section for which I didn't have diaries. And what I found was that the process of writing those diaries in the first place was more important than having the physical diary, because it embeds a lot of those things in your mind. I also had a lot of other resources as well, and of course I remembered far too much detail, and I ended up, the first draft I think was something like 300,000 or 400,000 words. And
the final book was another small book.
No, I think the final book was about 170,000 words, and that felt at that time very, very tight.
That's incredible. I wanted to ask you though, then, as an explorer, as an adventurer, do you think that there's room for more exploration in the world? I mean, there's always this discussion that we have seen everything that you know. I mean, there's a certain amount of arrogance in that very statement, but you know, people are always pushing themselves to do things like, you know, the first person to ride horses across Antarctica or something like that. That we go to extreme environments to find the unexplored. Are there still places in the world that are yet to be explored, do you think?
I mean, I guess from my point of view, the essence of discovery and exploration has always, partially at least, been in discovering human wisdoms in cultures that are near and far. We don't need to go to the ends of the earth to make personal discoveries as well as new discoveries. I mean, I know I've learned Russian language, I'm still learning Mongolian, but there are so many languages out there to be learned. There are so many cultures to be encountered. And I don't think it's important that you're the first to do so. It's most importantly an opportunity to have a window on the world, to be able to walk in other people's shoes and look back at our own world from a different perspective. And I think that the essence of a good trip, a good travel, is returning with your lens on the world, even so slightly altered. So no, I look at the world map regularly, and there are so many places, so many mountain peaks, so many that I've never been, and I can't find a lot of information about, despite there being an ocean of information out there. I think authenticity is something that you can find around every corner. It just may not be on the main trails or at the main icons that we all know of. I think that for every wonderful place that we know of, there are 10 that we don't know of. And in a place like Mongolia, like I've said, it's the size of Queensland, and there are still so many regions that I've not been to that will take a lifetime of exploring. And the fact that humans have lived there for tens, hundreds of thousands of years makes it more exciting to me. It's not important to have a human first.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, my last question, which we ask all of our guests, is, and I'm having read your book about this 3-year quest, I'm sure that you have many experiences. What is your most bizarre travel experience?
Bizarre is an interesting word, but perhaps one just in recent times that might shed a little bit of light on how nomadic culture operates. So last October, I was running a trip with World Expeditions. It was all exploratory, and a big snowstorm had come in 2 nights in a row, and we were looking for a way in and out of these mountains. The camels weren't able to go up the really steep, slippery snow slope, so we were looking for a way out. It was very, very cold, and finally in the distance we saw this little felt tent, the gur of a nomad, and I thought, oh, thank goodness, there's a family there. We can have a little bit of respite, eat our lunch out of the wind. But when we turned up, of course, there was no one there. In fact, the family had migrated away before the storm had reached, but they had intentionally left their gur up just for travellers like us to take refuge in a storm. So the Mongolian nomads with us, they didn't hesitate whatsoever. They opened the door, went inside, got the fire going. We had this bizarre experience of sitting in someone's home, eating our lunch that was cooked on their stove. They had a little television hooked up to a 12-volt battery. We sat there and watched it, and it couldn't have been more normal for nomads. And yet for us, it was a slightly bizarre experience, to do that. But once again, a wonderful sign of how community is essential out there in these vast spaces, that without helping out each other and putting those type of things in place, leaving a home intentionally left behind and door open, unlocked for anyone in trouble. I mean, that was just a wonderful thing to experience.
And that seems to have wrapped up pretty much the entire concept of your travels in Mongolia and throughout those lands of the nomads. Tim, it's a great anecdote to end on, and thank you so much for joining The World Awaits. It's been fascinating to listen to your experiences, which I have watched and read over many, many years. So we're so pleased that you could join us today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Gosh, that sounds incredible. He's such an amazing adventurer. And if you want to learn more, then you can just go to Tim Cope, that's TIMCOPE, journeys.com.
Our tip this week is about how you can get your passport faster. So there's nothing worse than booking a flight, checking the passport and realising you don't have 6 months left on it, which means you can't get into most countries.
Yes, we've been stuck in that situation before.
I think we all have. But collectively, Australia did that the whole world did it after COVID, didn't they? There is a new fast track service, though.
Yes, there is. So there's now a new fast track service from July. So that will guarantee your passport application is processed within 5 business days of a complete passport application, but it'll cost you $100 on top of your regular passport application.
It's a great option for travellers seeking more certainty when they receive their passports. So you're going to have, we've still got the 2-day expedited service, but that's going to go up to nearly $300. So this is a slightly less expensive version in between.
It's got to be a bit more organised. So yeah, as well as that existing priority service, which does guarantee 2 days, you've just got to be organised, people, because then if you're a frequent traveller, don't do what I did and make sure that you do check your passport.
And also get in quick if your passport is about to expire, because from the 1st of July, community announcement here, from the 1st of July, passport fees are going up 15%. So an Australian 10-year adult passport will go up nearly $50 from the current price of $325 to $373, which actually puts us in one of the most expensive passports in the world.
Next week, I chat Japan. I'm taking you to the incredible island of Shikoku with the CEO of Explore Japan, Sanjeev Kanal. We talk about why Japan's so popular for Australians right now, all the things to do on Shikoku Island and beyond, and why you need to get off the beaten track on your next trip to this culturally rich island.
And we'd love it if you could leave us a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts. Click on our profile, scroll down to the bottom to ratings and reviews and hit those 5 stars, baby. If you feel like it, no pressure, but we'd love you even more. and if you're on Spotify, go to our main page and click on the 3 dots under our smiling faces.
That's a wrap for The World Awaits this week. Click to subscribe anywhere you listen to your favourite pods. And where can people find you, Kirsty?
I'm at Kirsty Writes on Instagram. That's KIRSTIE Writes, WRITES. And where can people find you, Belle?
You can find me at globalsalsa.com or on Insta at global_salsa.
Thanks for listening. See you next week.